13 days ago, the most hyped IPO in history opened. The stock shot up, peaked near $226, and then quietly started falling. Right now, it sits around 165. And if you're watching the chart wondering whether this is the dip to buy, I need to show you something nobody covering this stock is pointing at. Somewhere in Manhattan, a group of bankers is watching this stock trade every single day. Not because they own it, because there's a clause in the lockup agreement they helped write, and it turns every good week this stock has into the starting gun for insider selling. The drop you've seen so far isn't the risk. The real risk hasn't even started yet. It's printed on a calendar in a public document, and almost none of it has happened. By the end of this video, you'll have the exact dates, and you'll understand why the number on your screen today matters far less than the ones still coming. Before I go any further, let me say what this video is and what it isn't, because I want to be honest about it. This isn't a video about the company being a bad business. By almost any measure, it's an extraordinary one. It launches more rockets than entire nations. Its satellite network now serves more than 10 million customers across 160 countries. The government contract pipeline runs deep. So if you came here looking for someone to tell you the rockets won't fly, that's not what this is. This is about something different, and in a way more important. It's about the difference between a great company and a deal structured to favor everyone except the person buying today. Those are not the same thing. And the gap between them is exactly where ordinary investors lose money on deals like this one. What I'm going to show you over the next few minutes lives in a public document. It's printed in the prospectus the company filed with regulators before it listed. Anyone can read it. And yet, almost none of the coverage you've seen in the last 2 weeks has touched it. By the time we're done, you'll have a calendar with specific dates on it, and you'll understand why those dates matter more than the price your brokerage app is showing you right now. Before we get there, one quick anchor on price, because it matters for everything that follows. The company went public at a valuation of about $1.77 trillion against last year's revenue of roughly $18.7 billion. That's somewhere near $94 of valuation for every single dollar of sales. 94 to 1. For a company that posted an operating loss of more than $4 billion last year. To give you a sense of how stretched that is, consider the company that priced this deal. There was no auction, no range that drifted up as demand poured in. The price was simply announced. $135 a share, take it or leave it, before a single public investor placed an order. When a seller is that confident it can name its own number, that tells you something about who held the leverage in this transaction. It wasn't the buyer, so when I say the deal is structured to favor everyone except the person buying today, that's not a feeling, that's a number. The valuation already assumes the future has arrived. Everything that comes after this is about who profits if it doesn't. Let me build this from the ground up, because the rest of the video depends on getting this right. When a company goes public, only a small slice of its shares actually start trading on day one. In this case, that slice was about 5% of the company. The other 95% is still held by the people who got there first. The founder, the employees, the venture firms that funded the company over the years. Those insiders aren't allowed to sell yet, they're contractually locked up. The reason is simple. If everyone who owned cheap shares could dump them on day one, the supply would crash the price instantly. So almost every big IPO uses what's called a lockup period, usually 180 days, to hold that supply back. Now here's where this deal did something unusual. Instead of one cliff at the end of 180 days, the way most big IPOs do it, the company built a staggered release schedule. Several separate tranches that unlock at fixed intervals, 2 additional cliffs tied to earnings reports, and 1 trigger tied to the share price itself. That last part is the one I want to spend a minute on, because it's the part the headlines aren't covering. Here's the mechanism. If the stock trades a set percentage above its IPO price for a stretch of consecutive trading days before the first quarterly earnings report, an additional slice of insider shares unlocks for sale early. Read that again, slowly. The stock goes up, insiders get to sell sooner. The better the stock performs in its first weeks, the faster the locked supply becomes free. And here's why that matters right now, in this exact moment. The IPO price was $135. In its first few days, the stock blew past that, peaked near 226, and spent days trading well above the threshold that early unlock clauses are built around. In other words, the pop everyone celebrated in week 1 may have already done part of the clause's job. The countdown didn't wait for you to notice it. So the clause does something most retail investors will never see. It turns the day 1 pop, the thing everyone celebrated, into the starting gun for early insider selling. The harder the stock runs, the faster locked up insider shares become free to sell. The pop isn't a victory lap. It's the trigger. That's the clause. That's the mechanism. Now let me show you the calendar. I want you to picture a calendar pinned to a wall. June 12th was day 0. The company went public. About 5% of it was in the float, 95% locked up. We're now almost 2 weeks into that calendar, and here's the part that should stop you. Almost nothing on it has happened yet. Let's walk forward. The first wave of time-based unlocks lands in late summer. Starting around 70 days after listing, the staggered tranches begin releasing one after another in single-digit percentage slices, spaced a few weeks apart, running from late August into late October. By the time that sequence finishes, more than a third of insider shares will have been released, purely on the calendar, regardless of what the stock does. And those are just the time-based unlocks. 2 more cliffs land somewhere in between them, tied to the company's earnings reports. The first cliff fires a couple of days after the company reports its first quarter as a public company. The earnings release itself can land anywhere from midsummer to early fall depending on how the company decides to schedule its first call. Whenever it lands, a couple of days later, a much larger slice of insider shares unlocks, bigger than any single staggered tranche, and the exact date isn't fixed in advance, which means the moment it actually arrives is something most retail buyers won't be tracking. The second cliff is even bigger. A couple of days after the next quarterly report, an even larger slice unlocks. Then comes the standard lockup expiration around day 180 in early December. Every restriction that hasn't already lifted, lifts now. Whatever's left of the insider supply is free to trade. Add it all up, and the math closes cleanly. The staggered tranches, plus the 2 earnings cliffs, release the large majority of insider shares before the calendar even hits day 180. The remainder unlocks at the standard expiration. By early December, 6 months from listing, every restriction on the schedule has lifted. 6 months. That's the timeline you should be thinking about, not whatever the stock did in its first hour, and not whatever it's doing on your screen this afternoon. Think about what that means for the supply and demand of the stock. For the next half year, the number of shares that can be sold only goes up, in waves on a schedule the sellers can see and you mostly can't. More sellers arriving on a fixed calendar into the same pool of buyers. There is no symmetric force pushing the other way. And there's one more date worth marking. Roughly a year out from listing, the founder's own lockup ends. We'll come back to why that date changes the entire picture once you see it. So here's the question. Why would a company design a lockup like this? Why not just use the standard 180-day cliff that every other big IPO uses? The answer is that this schedule was built to do 3 specific things. And once you see what they are, the design stops looking neutral and starts looking deliberate. The first thing it does is avoid the cliff drop. When one famous electric vehicle maker's lockup expired a few years back, the stock dropped about 20% in a single day after a major backer disclosed it would sell its stake. When a well-known ride-hailing company's lockup expired, the stock hit an all-time low on the expiration date itself. When a prominent data analytics company's lockup expired, the stock fell more than 10% in a single session as insiders sold tens of millions of shares. Cliffs are brutal. Cliffs are visible. Cliffs make headlines. A staggered schedule diffuses that pressure across a dozen smaller dates that nobody outside the prospectus is going to track. The second thing it does is accelerate float growth. Remember that day 1 float of around 5%? The faster that number climbs, the higher the company qualifies to be weighted in the major stock market indexes. And here's the part most people have never heard. For companies with a very small public float, index rules can treat that float as if it were several times bigger than it actually is. A tiny sliver of trading shares ends up pulling far more gravitational weight in the index than the raw math should allow. And the heavier the weighting, the more forced buying pours in from every passive fund that tracks that index. There's well over $500 billion in funds doing exactly that. So every tranche that unlocks isn't just releasing supply for insiders to sell. It's also clearing the path for institutional buying to flood in. That's not an accident, that's a feature. Picture how that lands on an ordinary buyer. Call him Marcus. Marcus opens his app, sees the stock has pulled back from its peak, reads a headline about index funds being forced to buy in, and reasonably concludes that big institutional money is about to push the price up. So he buys. What Marcus doesn't see is that the same mechanism pulling that institutional money in is also unlocking the insider shares being sold into it. The forced buying he's counting on as a tailwind is, on the other side of the trade, the exit liquidity for people who got their shares for a fraction of what he just paid. Marcus thinks he's front-running the institutions. He's actually standing between the seller and the buyer, holding the difference. And the third thing it does is the part nobody is saying out loud. It gives insiders predictable exit windows on dates they can read in the prospectus today. The staggered tranches, the two earnings cliffs in between, the performance trigger sitting on top. None of these are secret, they're all public. They're just buried in 150 pages of legal language most retail buyers never open. The asymmetry isn't about access to information, it's about who reads it. None of this is illegal, none of it is even unusual for a deal of this size. It's just engineered. And the people who engineered it didn't engineer it for you. I know I'm asking you to take a lot on faith here. So let me anchor this in something concrete. What has actually happened to other companies when their lockups expired? The data analytics company went public a few years ago. Retail enthusiasm pushed the stock from around $10 at listing to near $40 by early the next year. Then the lockup expired. Insiders sold tens of millions of shares into the premium that retail had built. The stock fell more than 10% in a single session and spent months recovering. The expiration date itself was printed in the prospectus from day one. Almost nobody buying near the top was tracking it. The electric vehicle maker went public with one of the most exciting opening days in recent memory. The stock jumped more than 20% above its IPO price, and a lot of buyers took that pop as proof they needed to get in fast. 6 months later, the lockup expired. A major backer disclosed it would sell its entire stake. The stock dropped about 20% in a single day. Over the year that followed, it fell roughly 2/3 from where it had peaked. Every one of those dates was visible to anyone who looked. The ride-hailing company went public at $45 a share. By the time its lockup expired later that year, the stock had been struggling, and on the very day insiders were finally allowed to sell, it hit an all-time low. The price sat about 40% below the IPO price on the expiration date itself. The headlines framed it as a coincidence. It wasn't. The people who bought on opening day, the ones who believed the hype hardest, were the ones holding the deepest losses on the exact day the insiders were finally free to cash out. That timing is not bad luck. It's the design working as intended. Even a company that used a staggered schedule, the closest analog to what's happening here, wasn't immune. Its final expiration week alone dragged the stock down by double digits. The pattern across all of these is clean. The higher the speculative premium at the IPO, the more painful the expiration tends to be. This company went public at roughly 94 times last year's revenue. That's the highest premium of any major IPO in years. By that measure, the room for things to get rough on expiration day is unusually wide. None of those companies were bad businesses. Most of them are still around. Some have recovered. The point isn't that this company is going to collapse. The point is that the part of the deal that hurt retail investors in every one of those names, the unlock, is the part that's still ahead of us in this one. So let me come back to that date I mentioned earlier. The day the founder's lockup ends, roughly a full year after listing. The founder holds the majority of the voting power in this company. He's the face, the story, in a lot of ways the entire reason anyone cares. And in the prospectus, he committed to a much longer lockup than everyone else. He cannot sell a single share for a full year. Not in the late summer tranches, not at the first earnings cliff, not at the second, not at the standard expiration, not even if the performance trigger fires. He's locked out of all of it. Every headline calls that a positive signal. And on its own terms, fair enough. The founder isn't dumping shares on day one. That matters. But here's the part that doesn't show up in those headlines. Every other insider, the early employees, the early venture firms, the executives below the very top tier, is on the schedule we just walked through. Their first chance to sell starts in the next couple of months. By the time the founder's lockup even begins to lift, the rest of the inside has had a full year of unlock windows to cash out into retail demand. A full year of opportunities for the people who got there first to sell to the people who got there last. The person at the top is protected. The people in the middle get multiple exit doors over the next 6 months. The person buying this afternoon watching the ticker is the demand all those exits are pointed at. The whole structure makes a lot more sense once you see it from above. The founder doesn't need to sell in the next year. He holds majority voting power. His net worth doesn't depend on liquidity. And a public lockup signals confidence. The early employees and venture firms do need to sell. They've been waiting years to turn paper gains into actual money, and they have fun timelines and clients waiting on returns. So the deal lines up nicely for both groups. The founder gets the credit for staying locked. Everyone else gets the timing windows to cash out. The only people the structure doesn't line up for are the ones absorbing all of it. Same prospectus, same company, two completely different deals, depending on which side of the lockup you're standing on. So where does that leave you if you're genuinely drawn to this company? Because watching everything I just laid out is not the same as saying you should never touch it. There's a smarter path than the two loud options. The first loud option is to chase the hype, to look at the stock sitting around 165, tell yourself it's already come down from its peak, and buy in right before the staggered tranches start unlocking and the earnings cliffs land. We've now seen, step by step, why that's the weakest seat in the house. The second loud option is to write off the whole thing forever on principle, which throws out a genuinely remarkable business because the deal structure was unfair on day one. The third path is quieter, and it costs you nothing but patience. You let the calendar do the work that hype is trying to rush you past. 6 months from listing, every restriction on the staggered schedule will have lifted. The first earnings report will have landed, real numbers on the record that you can hold the company to. The second will have landed too. The performance trigger window will have closed, one way or the other. The forced index buying will have run its course. Every one of those events is a piece of real information replacing speculation. None of it requires you to predict anything. It just requires you to not be in a hurry. Here are the dates worth marking on your own calendar. Not for trading. For sanity checking the story as it unfolds. Late summer through mid-fall is the staggered tranche window. The first earnings report somewhere in that same stretch. Watch what gets disclosed. Watch whether the performance trigger has fired. The second earnings report a few months after that. And early December when the standard expiration arrives and the last of the insider supply is free to trade. By the time that final date passes, the price will reflect 6 months of reality instead of 2 weeks of countdown. That's the price worth deciding on, not the one on your screen right now. And here's the part worth holding on to. The best companies of the last few decades stayed viable for years after their IPOs. You did not have to own them on day one to do extraordinarily well. The market rewards the patient far more reliably than it rewards the early. The thing being sold to you as a once-in-a-lifetime, act-now moment is almost always a stock that will still be there next quarter, and the quarter after that, at a price set by reality instead of by a countdown clock. The single most important thing in this entire video wasn't the calendar. It was the habit of looking at deal mechanics before deal headlines. That habit works on any IPO you'll ever consider, not just this one. The trigger clauses, the unlock schedules, the float math, the index inclusion rules, they're all sitting in public documents months before the price action ever starts. The advantage isn't access. The advantage is reading. The number on your screen today is loud. The calendar is quiet. The number fades in a day. The calendar runs for a year. One of them is built to rush you. The other one is just telling you the truth on a delay. Pick which one you let make your decision. If this changed how you look at the hype, hit like so it reaches one more person about to buy the pop. Subscribe if you want to run this same lens on the next big deal before it lands, and I'll see you in the next one.